Yeah, the rose. So there is no extract of rosemary in that SNS.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a quality product. So I would not recommend it.
So
Because I do believe in effectiveness. And if you're going to have a product that you're using with your beneficials, you want to make sure that it's effective.
right. Okay, pure crop.
Yes.
We talked to someone's asking about that. I also would like to know about pure crop one.
Pure Crop One is also the type of product where I think it's overpriced for what it is. There's a lot of sort of fancy language that they use to imply that the product is more technologically advanced than sort of your generic horticultural oil. Horticultural oils are great. They are a perfect addition to your IPM. They work well for a variety of pests. They're generally non-toxic. They're not going to leave a harmful residue that harms your beneficials. Horticultural oils are great. I just think Pure Crop One has a bit of a overinflated marketing, and the price point's a little high for the product that it is. But I think it's a perfectly effective, well, I mean, relatively effective, beneficial insect compatible product if you were looking for one.
So I like it just because it doesn't leave a residue, at least that I can see. And I can't stand when they get sticky and dull. So
Yeah,
this is not going to harm my beneficials if I spray this on it.
correct.
And
Yes.
how, and why is that?
Because generally, when we're talking about things that harm beneficials, we're looking for products that have an active ingredient in them that's going to stay on your leaves. So we're talking about things like Captain Jack's that has spinosad in it as the active ingredient. We're looking at pyrethrins, bifenthrins. These are products that leave toxic residues on the leaves that the beneficials come into contact with and then are either killed or damaged by that product. Horticultural oils in general kill by suffocation. So the idea of the horticultural oil is, think it's like a gigantic drop of oil and it lands on the insect and it suffocates them. So that means that don't spray it on the plants while the beneficials are working because they would still be susceptible to that, but it's not going to leave a toxic residue on your leaf that they can then come into contact with.
Okay. So if they're on there when I spray it, they will be affected, but it's not going to linger.
Yes. Yep. And so generally timing your use of any horticultural oil with your beneficial insects kind of appropriately is going to make sure that you get, the best of both controls. And when we're talking about sprays, I do always stress, especially if you're treating an active pest issue, and I think people tend to forget this, you should use the spray after you rinse your foliage, not instead of. So I think I really want to encourage people to step away from our first instinct being grab a spray the plant. Your first instinct when you see a pest should be take the plant to the sink and rinse the pest away and then follow up with a spray.
I hear that in my ear all the time. I hear you saying that. I'm always like, God, I had to take it to the sink because Jamie says I should rinse it.
Because,
Yeah.
and I mean, think about it in terms of the history that pesticides were developed for commercial growing operations where manually rinsing and removing the pest wasn't available to them. You have 50,000 acres of pepper plants. You can't take them to the sink. And I've talked to a lot of, sort of IPM professionals in the field, and they always joke they wish that they could tell their commercial pepper plant growers to take their plants to the sink because it is such an effective intervention. The pesticides were designed to operate at commercial levels where you're not really able to do that specific sort of rinsing and washing that you can within your own plant collection. So rinse first, spray second.
Okay, awesome. Sulfur. I had a question about using sulfur.
Yes. I am very much in the anti-sulfur camp. I don't think that it is a product that should be used indoors. And this is because sulfur is, there seems to be this question of, is the sulfur in this bottle just the natural element that plants need for growth? Most sulfur produced in the US, and this is a deep dive that I am currently in the middle of, is a byproduct of the petrochemical industry. And so when you put it, sort of on your plants, it's going to off-gas for a long time. There have been studies that have shown that the off-gassing of sulfur, which is used largely in vineyards in Northern California, the off-gassing of sulfur causes respiratory issues in farm workers who live up to a mile away from its application. And so in terms of the sort of health effects of it being in the living environment where you are, I would not want that in my house. I've had a client report that it tarnished silver in her living room from across the room, sort of where she had applied it. So in terms of safety, I think that the overall risk is fairly high. And also with yeah, and as Suzanne says, commercial growers after applying sulfur cannot go back into the greenhouse for 24 hours for worker safety. So, and especially when we think about spaces, a greenhouse where you're working is a fundamentally different space than the living area where you live. So this is where we live and breathe and sleep. We engage with this environment differently than in a greenhouse where we work. And so that's a workspace that people are not allowed to enter. So it's not a safe product to use indoors. And then when we think about effectiveness, if you were taking all of the time to cover every single leaf surface with sulfur, that's time you could be just wiping the leaf off with just water. So I would, definitely stay away from sulfur, especially if you're using beneficials, because again, we talk about toxic residues. The sulfur itself is a toxic residue, and so you wouldn't be able to use them together.
It's really hard to get off. Like I find that it stays on a really long time. So I would imagine that would just be a death sentence for beneficials.
Yeah. Yes.
Has to be
And
hard.
as Suzanne is adding too, this is something to know, and I've heard that it's up to a month. Do not use sulfur and a horticultural oil within a month of each other. You will severely burn your leaves. So those two things cannot be used in conjunction with each other.
I've heard that too. Yeah. What about things like watering in, like Azamax, Contos? I've heard that watering in miticides and things like that, that if the plant absorbs it, it's only going to hurt the bug that eats the plant, not the bug that eats the bug that eats the plant. How true is that?
It depends on the product. It depends on the beneficial. It depends on the pest. So the risk to beneficials from systemic insecticides is, yes, primarily from eating the pest that has consumed the toxin. But we also just want to think environmentally. So, if you put Contos in the soil and it's in there and it's being taken up by the plant, and then you apply your beneficials there, there's a non-zero chance that the beneficials could come into contact with that pesticide. And so for me, in general, because the beneficials are the most effective intervention, I tend to recommend to stay away from other interventions that could impact that beneficial unless there is a very clear value add from that product. And so depending on what pest you're dealing with, there are use cases where we might want to add in specific active ingredients or specific, I would say, beneficial compatible products. But when we're talking about, things like Contos, things like Azamax, I personally haven't seen an effectiveness argument for including them in addition to beneficials, that it's generally best to create the most conducive environment for your beneficials and then practice and learn how to use them well. Because I know that it's a learning curve, right? And that beneficial insects, they are a tool, and like any tool, you have to learn how to use them. And making sure that the environment for them is as conducive as possible is going to help them be the most effective tools possible for you. So until or unless I find a systemic product that has a use case where the value add is greater than the effectiveness of the beneficials, it's not something that I would recommend.
And then, and again, a question for me, what about things like neem meal?
Neem meal, I think the value add is...
Smells bad.
Yeah, it smells bad. I would say the value add is minimal. And, I don't think that it's really a necessary product to use if, your beneficials are applied appropriately, regularly, and working pretty well. So
The bennies at all?
yeah. And
Is it
that makes a good point too, that really check the label on your neem products. Look very closely at the label and make sure that there are no other active ingredients in it, or even no other ingredients. So a lot of pesticide companies sort of sneak active ingredients in the other ingredients section of the pesticide label. So check your neem products and make sure that it is pure neem, because sometimes it's going to be there's going to be pyrethrins in there. So just be very careful.
That's really dirty.
Yes.
All right, we have a question about beneficials for root mealies.
Beneficials for root mealies are very challenging, and there is not a curative beneficial for root mealies, and I am very sorry to tell you that. The best option for root mealies, the most effective intervention, is going to be a hot water soak of the entire root ball for up to 115 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. This is going to be the best intervention for root mealies. So you either need to do that with the whole plant. When I'm treating root mealies, I take the plants out of the substrate. I rinse them really well with hot water. Then I do the hot water soak, and you would be amazed. Even if you've really, really, really rinsed those roots, when you do that hot water soak, you'll see all the root mealies float to the surface. It's amazing. Then I rinse, then I do it again, then I repot in fresh soil and into a fresh pot. Like I'll sterilize the pot and run it through my dishwasher. And then if you want to follow up with beneficials as sort of an overall prevention, maintenance, cleanup crew, some that tend to work, but again, none of these are curative for root mealies. There just really are not any good beneficials for that specific pest. But road beetles are fairly aggressive, and they'll move through the whole sort of substrate, from the top to the bottom, which is helpful to kind of get all the root mealies that are remaining. There are some studies that show that nematodes SC can be helpful. And so, sort of working within that space. But again, this is a pest where that initial manual rinsing removal step is going to be super, super, super key.
Can you, I had only heard of nematodes from watching SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what those are?
Sure. So nematodes are pathogenic roundworms, or sorry, non-pathogenic roundworms that are going to basically live in your soil, and they're going to infect different pests that live down there. So they're totally microscopic. There's nothing to be kind of afraid of. They will just live in the soil. They're not going to move anywhere else. They're really, really great for fungus gnats. That there's absolutely no reason to use any other intervention other than the nematodes. That they're going to clear up your fungus gnats for you really quickly. They'll control for sort of other types of pests that you may see down there. So Thrips pupa is one of them. And there are a bunch of different species of nematodes. So you can use them in a variety of contexts. The ones for fungus gnats are going to be the ones for your houseplants, but you can use other species outdoors to control for things like Japanese beetles is a really big one, or grubs or things in your outdoor gardens.
Okay, and there are many. There's we saw 3 different kinds of nematodes.
Yeah. So SF is the one for fungus gnats. HB is the one for grubs. I remember because it has a B in it. And then SC is a nematode that's for a bunch of other types of pest insects outside. So it's a really generalist nematode.
Okay, and the pathogenic ones obviously are the ones that are the huge deal, and has California all in an uproar.
Right. So I do get people who come to me, and even just at PlantCon, I was in Houston, and I had someone say, how can you sell nematodes? Because I can't export my plants from Florida because they're so worried about having nematodes. That is the root knot nematode, and that is a very different issue than the sort of beneficial nematodes that we use. Those are, like you're saying, those are the pathogenic nematodes. Those are ones that damage plants. The beneficial nematodes that we use are not the same.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
If you let your soil dry out, does that affect your nematodes?
Nematodes do best in damp soil. So it is good to sort of time your nematode application with your watering cycle. But I personally grow in a very chunky mix, and I can be a little bit lax with my watering. And so they tend to do okay. If you are growing, succulents, or, have a really dry mix, or plants that really need to dry out, you might get better control with Stratiolaelaps because they're a bit more versatile and they can live in a variety of environmental conditions. So nematodes are definitely for soil, and they do best in denser, damper soil. But they can handle some sort of moisture fluctuations. But if you feel like your soil really dries out fairly regularly, then I would go with the Stratiolaelaps.
Yeah, that's something that I regret that I'm not going to be able to try with semi-hydro, but I do have outdoor plants.
Yes.
So I know the whole outdoor use of beneficials is something that we're really getting more and more into. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. So using beneficials outdoors is, for me, it's just a more dynamic and exciting space within our houseplants. the environment is fairly controlled and fairly contained, but outdoors you have a variety of different variables that can enter sort of into your growing. And I encourage people to think about outdoor gardening seasonally. So you want to start with early season applications before the pests that have been overwintering kind of start to emerge. So think about your soil, think about your seedlings, think about how you're starting things. You really want to get an early start on prevention, using different species of nematodes in your growing medium, using the stratiolaelaps, depending on what pests you tend to struggle with or what plants you're growing. Again, we can help you sort of put together a targeted early season treatment plan to set you up well for the growing season. And then as you sort of move through, we can target treat any pests that are kind of popping up for you for things like aphids or thrips or spider mites. The whole idea is very similar to what we do indoors. There's just a lot more dynamism and a lot more variability when you're growing outdoors.
And probably we can't put the satchels out, right? No satchels outdoors.
I mean, they tend to get a little more damaged and destroyed outdoors. You can still use them outdoors, and plenty of people do. But they do, because if they get too soaking wet, they're going to fall apart. It's always good to kind of start with bulk products if you can.
Great. Someone asked about ladybugs. I know you'll have a little bit to say about ladybug use.
So ladybugs are very cute, and they are generally people's first introduction to beneficial insects. And I always feel really bad because you shouldn't use them. And I'm sorry to say that. At least commercial ladybugs. So commercial ladybugs, the ones that you see at garden centers or that even some beneficial insect suppliers still offer, which they shouldn't, are wild harvested in the Sierra Nevadas. So basically, you have people who are going to the Sierra Nevadas in California with big garbage bins, and they're scooping hibernating ladybugs into these garbage bins. And this has a really detrimental effect on the environment in California where they're coming from. But it's also just really sad. Um, because these ladybugs, they're in a sort of older stage of their life. They are sort of trying to like hibernate, and then they're being shipped all over the country, and introduced into areas where they are not native to, and then they're spreading disease, and other issues. So there are sort of intents and intentions to start commercially producing ladybugs by reputable insectaries, but it's not super widespread yet. So any of the sort of containers that you're seeing at garden centers, I would definitely stay away from. And again, this is where it sort of comes back to also like insectary industry knowledge. You really want to make sure that you're engaging with reputable insectaries, that that you can really have faith that the products that they're offering to you are going to be ethical, sustainable, and easy to use and effective. So I would say just to be very, very careful when you're
Because, for instance, our insectary, that's all they do, right? They literally just
yeah.
breed and produce these bugs.
Exactly. Yep. And there's a lot of quality control that goes into that. And so knowing that you have an insectary partner that you can rely on. And I mean, we've tried all of the products in the industry. We've been doing this for a long time. And, the insects that we provide are easily and hands down the best quality in the industry. And that's why we offer them and work with them. That, we did not, as DMV Beneficial, set out to be a provider of beneficial insects, that we were here primarily as an education organization. But because access to the products was really challenged given the high shipping charges and the large sizes, that our goal was to then make sure that people had access to the tools that we were teaching them worked super well.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
A couple questions about nematodes, not using fertilizer.
Yes, I mean, so nematodes can be damaged by synthetic or high nitrogen content fertilizer. We generally recommend, you definitely should not mix your nematodes with your fertilizer. That's not a way to go about that. But again, just sort of timing your applications of your fertilizer so it's not within, too close of proximity to your nematodes is going to be the best way to go about it.
When I have tried to apply lacewings on houseplants outside for the summer, ants attack them.
Yes, that is very true. And this is a big challenge, especially with the lacewing egg cards outdoors. Loving the lacewing egg cards is actually a privilege that we get of using them indoors because we don't have the problem with ants. Ants will absolutely attack your egg cards. They're going to rip all of the lacewing larva eggs off. They're going to eat the larva themselves, and they're going to aggressively protect things like mealybugs or aphids because they actually feed off of and almost farm these pests so that they can eat the honeydew that they produce when they feed. So controlling for ants when using the lacewing larva outside is going to be really key to using them successfully.
Oops, I just had it. Okay, so a little Botanica has been using nematodes and still has fungus gnats. What would be the next step?
I would add in the stratiolalaps. There's a bunch of different things that could be going on, and things that I would want to know would be, are you still using the sticky traps for the adults is going to be key. Other things that come to mind are, where are you sourcing them from? What's the quality? Preparation and handling. So did they stay cold in shipment, and were they cold in the fridge until you decided to use them? Did you use the whole package at once? And then we start to get into things like, what is the growing medium that you're using? Is it staying moist enough? And generally, what I say to people is, okay, if you use the nematodes, you should see improvement. I would say 80 to 90% of people see immediate improvement after just one release. Sometimes it takes two. If you're at that stage where you're saying, you're like, I've used them twice and I'm still seeing fungus gnats, that's extremely abnormal. And I would consider either adding in or switching to using the stratiolalaps and see if you get some improvement in your control, because it could be a substrate. It could be a substrate issue.
You know, the strats are another type of mite, right, that we sell.
Yep.
And the benefit to them is that they will go down into the soil, correct?
They can live in a variety of mediums. So you can use them in semi-hydro, you can use them on moss, you can let your soil dry out, and you don't run into some of the same control risks that you can get with the nematodes. And they're also generally easier to apply. The nematodes, they do need to be kept cold through shipment. They need to be sort of kept in the fridge. They need to be mixed with water. You need to apply them. And so with the nematodes, there's actually more steps for human error. And the stratiolalaps are a bit easier to apply.
Yes, there is a lot of information on the DMV websites. Very, very helpful. Also, the Facebook groups, as Jamie said, you can ask questions there. There's just a wealth of information. Controlling ants.
Yes. Ants are very hard to control, and there are also different ant species. The theme of this live is there are different species of all of these pests that require different control methods. I have had some clients report some improvement in ants by using the nematodes SC. Again, the nematodes SC aren't going to control your adult ants, but there's been some evidence that they can control some of the ant larvae, but I would not expect them to give you, sort of meaningful control for ant species. Ant traps are usually decently okay. And then depending on, what type of ant species you're dealing with, again, we can give you kind of more specific information for different types of ant species.
Diatomaceous, we don't like her.
I'm not, again, in terms of effectiveness, I'm not against diatomaceous earth, but it does use its effectiveness when it's wet.
So loud. I don't know why the giveaway has to be so loud. Congrats, Tammy.
So it does lose its effectiveness when it gets wet, because it just loses its sharpness. So
Yeah, sure. Okay.
yeah.
Kate wants to know how you feel about BT eye drops.
You can use them with beneficials. I do see another question about that. I don't see them as effective as nematodes. So in general, if I end up with fungus gnats, which is fairly rare, I would just go for nematodes rather than with the BTI drops.
Michelle, so besides our website, which is amazing and awesome, are there books that somebody could purchase that you would recommend if they wanted to read more?
I can put together a reading list. There are not too many easily accessible, great sort of physical resources to rely on. But I can put together a reading list if we want to share. And there's different places that you can sort of go.
I feel like in my short amount of time using beneficials and being in the organization that things change so quickly. Am I correct?
Can you repeat that?
I
Sorry.
feel like things change really quickly. I feel like we're always learning something new, and there's just a new wealth of shared information, and opinions change and we grow and evolve. Is that pretty much accurate?
Yeah, and I mean, especially within the beneficial insect industry, it hasn't really been a space that has don't know how to say this. It's like the information is there and, people are sharing it, but, kind of condensing it into a guidebook just hasn't been something that has happened. And as someone who believes really deeply in information accessibility, I do think that that would be extremely helpful. We have put together what I would call small guidebooks. So you can download, we have a handbook, kind of on the webpage, and some sort of larger resources that you can rely on. But in general, in terms of just authoritative books on pest management using beneficial insects, I would not say that there's like a go-to book that you can kind of reach out to. Yeah, Suzanne says, she was like, we are too busy working, there's no time to write. That just seems to be, there's just so much demand for beneficials and not a ton of time for writing these guidebooks. So I do think that's something that definitely needs to change.
A shout out also to the DMV YouTube page. There are amazing videos on there for release.
Yes.
So the medium for the strats, I've only used them once. From what I remember, they are insane, and I couldn't get out of the way fast enough. We're out, and they were doing their job. I didn't even have to dump medium. Am I remembering that correctly?
It's possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they do come in a peat mixture. So again, if you're growing in semi-hydro, you're not going to want to put that directly onto your leca. It would be very messy to clean up. But if you're growing in soil, that tends to be, at least for me, one of the easier ones to use because it's just a peat mixture with a little bit of vermiculite in it.
So, is there anything that you can use in conjunction with beneficials? So, not before or after, but at the same time, like natural sprays, or is it just water?
I would not use anything while you have active beneficials on your plants. But this is actually sort of a thing that I have been meaning to speak to. I do think a lot of people come to this space thinking I need to have active beneficials on my plants at all times to use them successfully for prevention or management. And that is not true. That what we think about instead, even with something like prevention, is timed intermittent releases where the beneficials are going to go. They're going to do a sweep, they're going to die, and then your plants are not going to have any beneficials on them. And I think we get a little anxious about that because if we're coming from a pesticide space, not having a pesticide means that pests are going to pop up. But that's just because pesticides don't work very well. And so the beneficial insects work so well that if you just apply them regularly and they do their sweep, and then you don't have to kind of worry about it. And so there is no product that is safe to apply on the beneficials while they're working, but there are beneficial insect compatible products you can use in between those sweeps for peace of mind and for additional pest control. One that we have been seeing a lot of success with and that I use for a lot of our retail and commercial partners is EpiShield. I like it a lot, and we get really good results with it. So that's something that you could use, kind of in between beneficial insect releases if you needed to. Or again, straight horticultural oil is also very good when it comes to just sort of an in-between beneficial insect compatible product.
What is EpiShield?
It is an oil-based product that has different types of essential oils in it, and works super well. It's great.
Okay, interesting.
Yes.
I think, as a grower seller, the last thing you want to ever do is talk about having pests, right?
Yes.
And I know Kate and I have talked before that if somebody now, that as much as we know now, if someone comes to us and says, I've never had a pest, we're going to avoid them like the plague. Because that either means that they're not being truthful or they have so many pests right now and they're clueless.
Yeah.
And I think, what you said about, I think you're always going to be dealing with pests, right? They're always going to be coming, and thinking that you have failed because you're dealing with a pest really goes against nature, right? You treat them, you take a pause, and you get ready for the next round.
Yeah, and I mean, pests are a part of growing plants, and the only way that I'm able to grow the mature anthuriums that I have in my life is because the beneficial insects are effective. And as you develop, the sort of wisdom around using the beneficial insects effectively, it's really going to start to feel like that pest management is just a part of plant care. And I think where we get so frustrated is that the traditional tools we're handed, pesticides, don't work. And so we're like, well, it's it's a part of plant care, but it's killing my plants. And so, switching into beneficials can make pest management much more joyful. And it's just, it's part of the process. And I'm trying to think, I'm like, I still do end up with pests on my plants. Like I put them outside, it's just part of growing, but I don't feel that stress and anxiety about it because I know that the beneficial insects are going to work so well, and it's going to allow my plants to stay healthy. So making sure that you don't panic about pests, that you understand that it's natural, that it's not that you failed as a grower, that this is totally normal, but then learning what tools you need to reach for to manage them is just part of the growing process. And as someone said in the chat, it makes you a better grower, it makes you a stronger grower.
Yeah, that's just a whole another level of connection with your plants.
Mm-hmm.
And it reduces the stress each time you go through it. I think it just gets more and more manageable. Somebody mentioned alcohol. How do you feel about alcohol as in between beneficial spray?
Yeah,
Obviously, too much use can damage the plant.
Yeah, I'm in the too much use can damage the plant camp, and that there's not too much of a value add to it. From my point of view, and like I say it all the time. I'm like, just rinse the plant off with water. Like, alcohol doesn't have much of a value add beyond just rinsing it off with water.
I'm trying to get the deepest laundry sink in my new house possible because every time I'm rinsing them off with water, I'm also wearing the water. But
Yep.
hearing you in my ear saying that that's what I need to do.
Just rinse it out.
Let's see. There's another question here. Okay, so if someone's listening, maybe is newer, maybe is still learning to identify pests really well, but just wants kind of a general, let's try the beneficials and see what happens. What would you recommend for like just a first round of let's see?
I would start with the Cucumera sachets. That's usually if, I'm doing a consult and someone comes to me just like that, I'll say, well, let's start with the Cucumera sachets. I say that for two reasons. One, the sachets are a super easy product to use. That, they come sometimes in strips. You just separate them at the perforations. They already have a hole. You're extremely unlikely to see a single bug from them. So it's a really easy on for people who are maybe a little wary about bugs. And they work super well. And I do feel like, Cucumeris is the standard industry thrips predator. And I would say that someone who has probably never used beneficial insects before is likely there's a thrip or two in their collection. So I think that's usually a good place to start.
Can you just break down the thrip thing one more time? I obviously know about them. You've said a couple times that there's a multi-layer treatment. I just want to make sure that everyone understands what these are and what that entails, because if you see one, you've got to get on it.
Yes. So thrips have one of the more complex life cycles of the different pests that we deal with on houseplants. So thrips adults, they're the skinny black insects that you may have seen photos of on the internet. They look kind of like a pencil shaving. The adults are going to walk around on your plants. They're going to eat the leaves. They're going to damage usually the underside of the foliage, but also the tops, depending on the species. They're going to lay their eggs into the leaf tissue inside of it. Then those larvae are going to chew their way out of your leaf, and then the larvae are going to damage and eat the leaf foliage, and they're going to eat that leaf tissue. Then, depending on the species, what happens next can be different. Some species, then the larva is going to go through its